And Dr. Martin, you recall testifying in this very same courtroom at the waiver hearing, correct?
Correct, yes.
And how much interaction have I or my office had with you since that time?
None at all. Just to notify me of this hearing today.
Thank you. I wanted to make clear on the record, we didn't try to prepare you for this testimony or anything else, did we?
No.
Dr. Martin, the judge has read the transcript of your previous hearing, but I'd like you to just briefly go over your qualifications.
I'm a forensic psychiatrist. I got my MD degree from Michigan State University. I did a 4-year psychiatry residency at the Detroit Medical Center and Detroit Psychiatric Institute. I did a fellowship in forensic psychiatry at the State of Michigan Center for Forensic Psychiatry and the University of Michigan Law School. I've practiced here in Anderson since 1992. I'm a forensic psychiatrist for Greenville County for their detention centers, both the adult and juvenile divisions. I also am on staff at ANMED Medical Center and Patrick Harris Psychiatric Hospital.
And how long have you been working at the Greenville County Detention Center?
Approximately 19 years.
All right, I'd like you to just go back to, well, actually, I'm going to ask you one other global question. Do you have records in front of you from the time that Jesse Osborne was at the Greenville County Detention Center?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and how long did you treat him?
Started in September of
I'll represent to you as
2016, right. And until he left there in, I believe it was 2018. Actually, 2019 in April.
Okay. And describe for me your treatment of Mr. Osborne, starting at the beginning.
My initial evaluation, I determined a diagnosis of major depression, single episode with psychotic features, and post-traumatic stress disorder.
And what was that diagnosis based on?
My psychiatric evaluation, his presentation, also information I received from some of the counselors that worked there that also saw him.
And did you take a detailed history of Mr. Osborne when you first saw him?
Yes, fairly detailed.
Do you recall the details of that? Did anything from that history stand out to you as we sit here today?
The trauma that he had been through, both at the hands of his father at home and the bullying and treatment that he had received at school over a period of time.
And those things had led us to the diagnosis that you came to.
Yes. He was having some flashbacks and nightmares of some of the things that had happened to him, both at the hands of his father, who was both verbally and physically abusive to him, as well as some of the traumas that he had being bullied or beaten up at school over a period of time.
Now, while he was at the detention center, do your records reflect that he was involved in any therapies?
He had therapy from the counseling staff there, yes.
And how did he respond to that therapy?
He did fairly well.
Do you think his condition improved somewhat?
I think it did. In addition, I had him on some medication to address his depression, some of his insomnia, and later I put him on antipsychotic because of the hallucinations he was having intermittently.
Okay. If you would, I'd ask that you briefly discuss, and I will phrase this question poorly, I know, because I did previously. Briefly discuss the way a child's brain develops from about the age of 10, 11, 12 through 16 or 17.
Well, there's gradual development, mostly of the majority of the brain up through adolescence, both, cognitively, emotionally, and by age 20, roughly, is when the person's brain has developed. The majority of the brain has developed and matured by age 20, except for the frontal lobe. The frontal cortex of the brain is responsible for executive functioning, which is making decisions and governing your behavior. That doesn't fully mature until about age 25. And some of the reasons behind some of the adolescent behaviors and problems and changes that we see in young people is because their frontal cortex is one of the last things to develop, which gives them more rational thinking behavior, and it kind of, so to speak, balances their emotional reactions and helps control their impulsivity.
Is it fair to say that for a child that's 13, 14, 15 years old, their emotional responses outweigh their rational responses?
Oftentimes that's correct, yes.
And explain, if you have any knowledge of this, how interaction with peers during the period of time before your brain has developed past this emotional response level, how does the interaction of peers reward or stimulate the brain?
That plays a role in the person's self-image and self-esteem and things that determine their behavior and their confidence and their responses to, both social and other types of situations.
Is it fair to say that the role of peers pushes the reward stimulus in the brain or the excitement stimulus in the brain?
To some extent, yes, that's correct.
And how about the role of conversations and interactions with the opposite sex? Does that tend to stimulate the same parts of the brain?
Yes, basically.
Can you explain the similarities of those two things, peers and sexual attraction or sexual activity, why they stimulate the same parts of the brain?
Well, peer interactions is going to help develop and stimulate their self-confidence and their view of themselves as being accepted or liked, or their interactions with members of the opposite sex, especially after puberty, is going to further shape their self-image and confidence and their view of themselves going forward as an adult. That's pretty much how those two differentiate somewhat between their peer group and the opposite sex.
Did you see any, did Mr. Osborne report to you anything that made you think he might be suffering from the symptom of psychosis?
At one point he describes some both auditory and visual hallucinations. Initially, the first time I saw him, he did not. He exhibited symptoms of depression and post-traumatic stress. After he'd been at the Juvenile Detention Center several weeks, one of the counselors brought to my attention that he had mentioned something about having some auditory hallucinations, and also had visions of seeing his father in the room with him.
And did you address those issues?
To some extent, talked to him about it, tried to clarify what the nature of those hallucinations were, and I started him on some antipsychotic medication in a low dose.
Okay. And can you describe for me the symptoms of post-traumatic stress that you observed in him when you first met with him?
Some of the symptoms that he was displaying initially were the flashbacks of previous traumatic experiences he'd had, nightmares about some of those same experiences. He had a startle response to certain things, like certain sounds or noises. I remember one time someone had slammed the door on the dryer in the same area of the juvenile center where he was, and he reacted very strongly to that and kind of ducked down and started acting very nervous. And asking him about that later, he said it reminded him of gunshots. And it brought back a lot of the things he'd been involved in that were traumatic for him.
And what symptoms did you observe of a major depression when you first met with him and then throughout the time you were meeting with him?
Well, he had, his mood was depressed, his affect was sad and somewhat restricted. His sleep was poor, which is one of the things that's often affected by depression. Also, his appetite was not very good. His interest in some of the things that he previously had enjoyed or had motivation for was lacking to a great degree, which we call anhedonia. And his outlook on his future was, quite negative and dim.
And again, he went to therapy sessions during the time he was at the Greenville County Detention Center, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And based on the entire spectrum of when you were his doctor, with those therapy sessions and the treatment and your discussions with him, you saw an improvement, correct?
Yes, I did. Mm-hmm.
And as far as you know, Doctor, you were the first person to see Mr. Osborne and evaluate him from a psychiatric basis after these events, correct?
Yes, as far as I know, yes.
Your Honor, Dr. Martin is a wealth of information that we went through in excruciating detail in the labor hearing. Because you have access to that transcript, I'm going to stop my questioning now because I think everything we need is in the record, and he's hit the things that I think are most important to the agency virus issues today. I'll happily go on if you think it's necessary.
For the record, I have read that transcript of the waiver hearing and Dr. Martin's records and reports prior to coming to court in this hearing. So,
Thank you, Your Honor.
all right.
That's all I have.
Ms. Price?
May it please the court?
Yes, ma'am.
Morning, Dr. Martin.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
How many times did you personally see Jesse Osborne?
It's hard to remember exactly. I'd say roughly 8 or 10 times.
Okay. I can give you a second to look at the records that are in front of you.
Well, there's not a record of each time I necessarily interacted with him.
Okay. Are you aware that Jesse Osborne had essentially been obsessed with Columbine and school shootings since at least February of 2016, and that continued up to his own school shooting? And that would have been at least 6 to 7 months before he came into contact with these peers in the Rainbow Group?
I'm not exactly sure of the time sequence of that, but I'm aware that he did do some research looking up things about Columbine.
Are you aware that he admired Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold to the extent that he emulated them, edited music videos of them, and used their words as his words to other people?
No, not to that extent.
Okay. Are you aware that part of the narrative of the Columbine shooting that has been mostly debunked was that Eric and Dylan were taking revenge on bullies, and that was part of the alleged justification for their horrific acts?
No, you're saying in context of what's been reported about the Columbine incident?
Yes. Are you aware that that was part of their justification?
Not relative to what Jesse Osborne has said.
No, I'm asking if you're aware that bullying was also part of the narrative of the Columbine shooting.
Yes.
Okay. Did you review a case file or materials when you met with Jesse and made your initial report?
I had some information, yes.
Okay. What was that information?
Some of the law enforcement records of the incident and his arrest, to the best of my recollection.
Okay. Did you review his school records?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Did you review DSS records?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Did you review his DJJ records prior to this incident?
I didn't view them specifically, but I had information about some of those.
Okay.
Yes.
Did you review any records that showed trauma at school or at home?
Yes, I can't remember which records they were, but yes.
Okay. But those would have been in the police report, the initial police report?
Well, the records that I was were made available to me when I was seeing him.
Okay. So you largely relied on what Jesse Osborne told you?
Some of what he told me, my psychiatric evaluation, and some of the records that I had, and also feedback from the counselors that were seeing him as well.
Okay. And we went over this at length in the waiver hearing, and as Mr. Epps said, the judge has incorporated your testimony from the waiver hearing into his consideration, so I'm not going to get into it today except to say you told me during the waiver hearing that you had not administered tests for malingering. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And are you aware that now both of the state's experts and both of the defense experts, in addition to Jesse himself, admit that he and state that he was largely malingering symptoms, including particularly psychotic symptoms at the time he was apprehended?
I didn't see the records from any other experts.
Okay.
I'm basing that on my evaluation of him and the
Okay,
time.
so you're not aware
that he
that
was
that's the
with me.
case. If I represent to you that's the case today, you would accept that, wouldn't you, sir?
On face value of what you're saying, but
Okay.
that's not what my evaluation showed.
But you didn't test for malingering?
No.
Okay. In your records that you reviewed, whatever those records were, did you ever see evidence of 6-year-old Jacob Hall bullying Jesse Osborne?
No.
I wouldn't expect that. Thank you.
I wouldn't
don't have any
expect
further
that
questions.
either.
Mr. Osborne appeared to you to be depressed, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And you've dealt with, well, I can't even begin to guess. How many juveniles do you think you've seen over your 19-year career at the Greenville County Detention Center and your other practice?
Over 1,000.
Okay. And when you're talking about 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds that have just turned 14, it's fair to say that they're immature, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And it's fair to say that they're impetuous, isn't it?
Oftentimes, yes, that's correct.
And it's fair to say that they fail to appreciate the risks and consequences of their actions.
Yes,
And it's fair to say that they're irresponsible and reckless.
that's a characteristic of many of them, or at times, yes.
Did you see anything in your time with Jesse Osborne that would indicate that he was different from a typical 13 or 14-year-old in that regard, in those regards?
No, not really, that I recall. No.
Okay. And would you describe becoming obsessed with making a plan that you largely didn't carry out and then killing your father and killing an innocent child at a school to be an act for which someone failed to understand the risks and consequences?
I think he probably didn't fully understand the entirety of the risks and consequences. I think some of it was reacting to some of the situational stressors that he was dealing with and reacting to some of the influence that he was having from the group of 6 people that were interacting with him on the internet.
You're talking about the Rainbow Group.
Yes.
That's what we're...
And also the abusive relationship with his father. And
And Doctor, I'll just go ahead and tell you, there's been some evidence over the last day or so that one of his conversations with the Rainbow Group was, for lack of a nice way to say it, romantic, and it would go back and forth between killing people and sexual stuff. Would that be something that would trigger a continuous reward in a young man's brain if he was stimulated by that sort of conversation?
that's possible, yes.
And you believe his family and home environment contributed to what happened?
Yes, I do.
And it's not unusual for a 13 or 14-year-old to fantasize about doing something, and when they do it, they decide they really didn't like doing it. Is that something you've seen in your practice?
Yes, I have.
And it's not unusual for them to plan something, and because of their lack of executive functioning or scheming, the plan goes horribly awry and they don't accomplish anything that they purported to want to accomplish, correct?
Yes, oftentimes that's correct.
And you'd say that that is potentially part of really the incompleteness of your process that's associated with youth.
Yes, that coupled with whatever environmental influences there are at hand.
Okay, did you see anything in your time with Jesse Osborne that made you believe that he was irreparably corrupt or hopelessly incorrigible?
No, I didn't.
Did he respond to treatment?
Yes, he did.
Okay. And you would say there's a possibility he's going to get at least 30 years in jail. You understand that, correct?
Yes, correct.
Would you say that based on your understanding of him and the potential he has for treatment, whether it's offered by the state or privately offered to him, he has the possibility of rehabilitation?
I believe he does, yes.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Martin, how many 14-year-old school shooters have you seen in your practice?
School shooters or just shooters?
School shooters. How many attacks on an elementary school have you seen?
I've seen a lot of teenagers that have shot people or,
That's not my question, sir. How many
understand that.
elementary
I
school
understand
shooters?
that.
Okay. How many have you seen? Wait, is it fair to say he's the only one?
probably.
Okay. And certainly, it's an extremely rare case, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Would Dr. Martin be excused?
Yes, sir.
Any objections?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you, Dr.
Okay.
Martin.
Thank you, Your Honor.